Okay, so a little bit of background for this. I was born in December of 1996, teetering on the edge of being a member of either the millennial generation or becoming a card-carrying member of Gen Z. Safe to say, it was very much an early sign for me that things in my life were never going to be going one way or the other, in more ways than one given what my life would become. Would be confusion and being stuck between two camps of some kind. But 1 year prior in 1995, a cultural reset would take place before I was even born, and would heavily impact a lot of what you're about to experience. Cheese TV. Cheese TV was essentially the bread and butter for anyone that became a pop culture nerd in their developing years. It had a lot, from Dragon Ball Z to card captors to Digimon and Pokemon. But there was one series that we're focusing on specifically today that stood out as one of the ones that got me started on the road ahead and then some for what we're about to be going through. And to think, it all started with a pretty guardian. Welcome to In Transition, a video essay series discussing the bits of media that pretty much encapsulated the 22-year journey in becoming who I am today. And today, we're going to be starting off this series with where my personal journey, and possibly the journeys of a few others as well, started off with Sailor Moon. I don't think I need to bore you all with the entire history of Sailor Moon, to be honest. You all know the lore about how Naoto Takaguchi's little shoujo manga practically became one of the most influential series of our time, and arguably created and then popularized the magical girl genre into what we see it as today. For better or for worse. I feel that by going through its nearly 3 decades worth of history up until now, it would be doing a major disservice to its legacy, not just to anime at large, but also to the general zeitgeist of when it first came out. So let's cut the crap and let's get to why we're here. What made Sailor Moon so important to someone like me? The answer to that is that as a young kid growing up around the time of it hitting the West, I was one half of its target demographic. Young children between the ages of 5 and 10. However, its main target demographic wasn't the one I was originally born into, but the one I had always wanted to be. The female demographic of the same age. Its popularity was huge at the time of its release, and when you're a shoujo manga in the early 90s and then adapted into an anime shortly after, it only makes sense that your audience would consist primarily of the type that would heavily look up to the types of our title character, Usagi, for instance. And speaking of everyone's favorite little airhead, yeah, she's pretty alright. Usagi is one of the most recognizable faces in all of anime, for sure. But in all honesty, while she is very relatable at times now, especially given how most of her quotes and moods can essentially boil down to "God, life is tiring" and "emotions are very hard," I feel bad because when I was younger, I hated her because of how annoying and over-emotional she was. Usagi obviously had the ability to just freely express herself emotionally, something as an emotionally repressed AMAB teenager growing up I had a lot of issues coming to terms with, and she also, as the titular character, had the most growth as a character, and arguably as a role model, with her embodiment as being the front-facing paragon, became more than just this ditzy, over-emotional teenager, and turned her into the strong-willed savior willing to stick it out to the end for her friends and then some throughout the series. And believe me, with the kind of media I was also being exposed to around about the same time, a younger me needed role models like that. But was she the one that I looked up to the most? Not really. But that's really of no fault to Usagi, to be honest. She's a brilliant character in her own right. It's just that her contemporaries, both on the side of the Scouts and the contemporaries on every other side of the spectrum when it comes to Sailor Moon's 5 seasons, were really not only a lot more interesting, a lot more diverse, but were also a lot more relatable in terms of my personal self and my own identity. You also have characters like Minako, who essentially embodies such a strong sense of justice in her role as a member of the Scouts, where I see a lot of people a lot of the time viewing her as one of the best of the entire unit, and the kind of passion and love for everything she latches onto throughout the 5 seasons of the show outside of battle, which kind of gave me, in a sense, the passion to follow the things I love no matter how hard they may be at times. This being one of them. On the other hand, you then have characters on the opposite ends of the spectrum in Ami Mizuno, who basically became my unabashed role model in my teenage years with how into nerd culture she is, while just in general becoming an overall fan favorite with how she more or less showed that even the bookworm of the team could be an utter badass. Insert your stereotypical brains over bronze analogy here all you want, but Ami pretty much showed that you can essentially do all of that while also being an otaku. To a degree, anyway. And that's pretty admirable if you ask me, because Ami more or less was the complete antithesis of what girls were meant to be at that time, as girls were at that time anyway were never really meant to be into pop culture stuff as she was, seen as a lot more very geeky, nerdy, and the complete antithesis of what Ami was essentially, or most of the scouts were anyway. And I feel like her showing off that she can be into more than just the smart type, and more or less blossom as something of an inspiration for a lot of others around about that time. Especially given the landscape, it's very important that Ami as a character was not just someone who was smart, but was also someone who could also show off that these kinds of aspects are very important, and loving what you like does not make you weird. And while I didn't get that much of an inspiration from them, I can see the appeal in others like Rei and Makoto, who both bring out some really good characteristics in their own rights. They didn't leave as much of an impact on me as I would say Usagi, Minako, and Ami did, but it doesn't lessen their importance as a unit. In fact, there's one moment involving Makoto that spoke to my very soul, as she struggles with her own femininity in seasons 3 and 4 as the group's muscle, therefore seeing herself as less feminine than the rest of the scouts. However, it's in meeting Haruka and her gender non-conforming ways that she learns a very important lesson. And as a result, she learns to love herself and the way that she expresses herself so much more. And this is where I personally felt like my gender identity questioning, or my egg, if you will, began to form. In this one moment, while she may not be my favorite scout, she will always be personally my most relatable scout due to moments like this. But speaking of Sailor Uranus, you have Haruka in the cast as well, and characters like her as well, who are just unbelievably gay, and people that I looked up to growing up quite a lot within my young adult years. Couldn't tell you why, to be honest. And as somebody who's only just now rediscovering her sexuality, in a sense, looking at characters like Haruka, it kind of makes sense as to why an entire generation sort of grew up to become more queer, diverse in a sense, because of characters like her. But Haruka is also a bit of a genderqueer icon as well, because, well, everything about her. Her dress sense essentially being the most complete opposite of her partner, Michiru, her mannerisms being the most masculine out of any female character on the show, and yes, that also does include Fisheye in that discussion, because Fisheye is an entirely different beast altogether. But with her mannerisms, the general inability for her to look even remotely feminine in the standard sense, and being in a very obvious female-female relationship that has also led to a lot of discussion on if she's either a butch lesbian, or just some kind of non-binary genderqueer representation. And honestly, my retort to that has always been, why not both? Sailor Moon has made no qualms about expressing its level of queerness to that degree, whether it be in subtle ways, or not so subtle ways. I mean, generalized terms aside, time has made it a lot easier for Haruka's identity to be more than just a butch lesbian. It's allowed her to be more seen as a bit more of anime's first envy character who is a bit more femme-leaning, while also being able to display traits of her still being a bit more of a butch lesbian as well, despite those qualities. Queer representation in of itself has become a lot more than just a black or white thing over the last few years, and it's why I feel like the representation of Fisheye essentially is also very important as well, because he's more in the gray area in a sense. Because he could arguably be seen as one of the first representations of androgynous or just straight up trans characters in all of anime. Because, well, look at him. There's no way that people were just going to be thinking, oh, he's just androgynous. because in both the recent Viz Media dub as well as the original Japanese dub, it's very much implied throughout all of it that there's a lot more going behind the scenes. But what do I personally think about this? Because there's obviously been a really big hot button debate on what the topic of fisheye really is. And if you're talking about me personally, I feel like it could be a contender for one of the first real trans characters in all of anime. And really, given this, it kind of says a lot about what we're about to get into in terms of this whole saga. But I digress. It's just a shame that any full-on characters in this show or showcasing of such traits are usually seen, initially anyway, in some cases, as being villains, and it takes from the idea that these kinds of aspects aren't good, and more misunderstood or evil in some cases. Again, 90s, I understand it, but it bears saying I do wish circumstances like this weren't as draining to sit through now, given time has changed so much. And you may be thinking to yourself, why is Chloe focusing so much on what is essentially one of the biggest pieces of media from the 90s? Well, that's because a lot of what I've discussed and a lot of what really spoke to me personally was either cut out entirely or completely neutered in the most famous way to watch this show, and it's really the most famous way to be able to watch it for a Western audience. We had to get to this point, ladies and gentlemen. Because you can't really talk about Sailor Moon without discussing that infamous dub of the show. I am, of course, talking about the Cloverfield Dick dub of Sailor Moon. A dub which is probably one of the most earliest and most infamous examples of early 90s dubbing. What with its obvious censorship, its changing of characters' names, to episodes entirely being missing from the series or just being chopped up together in a Frankenstein-like manner, to entire characters being completely stripped of their identities or more or less watered down to meet a standardized 90s American audience. I mean, cousins. That's all I really need to have to say in that regard. And not only that, just it becoming a complete stock standard Monster of the Week series with entire storylines having their core completely ripped out from them and having sweet little PSAs for the little kitties at the end of it really does say a lot about how Dick really didn't care about the original heart of Sailor Moon. But if I can make an argument for this, I would still say that even taking away the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, it really does still hold up in its own little place in the world, alongside a lot of the other pieces of media that do mean a lot to others as well as myself. Put down the pitchforks, everyone. I'm going to explain why. And that's not to say that this is the optimal and best way to watch Sailor Moon. No way, no how. But in doing research for this, I found that even today, there's still a dedicated section of the Sailor Moon fandom and even anime fans at large that look to the Dick dub of Sailor Moon and not feeling completely repulsed at the idea of watching it. Is there a still slight cringe factor when watching? Yes, very much so. But there's still a lot to find and love in how it's presented in such a way, even with its more abrasive moments in its presentation. And if I can make a further argument for the Dick dub, if it weren't for this show and its dub getting popular and therefore showing that there was a market for magical girl anime in the West that could appeal to all audiences, in some ways we arguably never would have gotten the Cardcaptors dub by Nelvana Entertainment near the end of the decade. Is there a slight bias for me in my love of Cardcaptors? Yes, what do you think I'm talking about here? But it goes deeper than that. See, if the Cardcaptors dub by Nelvana Entertainment never really got all that popular because of Sailor Moon's rise in popularity, we arguably never would have really got shows like Tokyo Mew Mew that would have been able to broaden the horizons for a lot of others in the mid-2000s, and essentially increasing the lifespan of the magical girl genre in the West by a lot. Because remember, magical girl anime wasn't really the hot thing in the West until, well, all of this came into the picture. And it's not like in Japan where magical girl anime or Sentai shows were really all that popular here. Because while Power Rangers was essentially very popular for boys, Sailor Moon and Cardcaptors in a sense were the only ones that really spoke to young kids of the female demographic. Then Tokyo Mew Mew happened, and then for older audiences, My Hime also really shot up in popularity for that. And, of course, Madoka Magica happened as well. So, Effectively, that little domino effect that started with Sailor Moon back in the 90s, if we never got that, not only would the Magical Girl anime never really have kicked off in popularity, but a lot of shows that we may be talking about later on down the line, and some that really speak to me personally, would never really have gotten that sense of popularity, and therefore never really would have sparked its own little sense of joy. And because of that, I still feel like Sailor Moon's Dick dub is very much still as important as anything else we're going to be talking about for that reason. So in a way, if Dick had not done what they had done with Sailor Moon, a lot of series that kept inspiring younger audiences, including myself and others, would never really have come to the West to begin with, and we wouldn't be where we are today. And with its cultural relevance and how close it is to my heart especially, even with its cheesiness, Sailor Moon deserves to be seen as both an inspiration to many young girls' admirations, but even more a mature woman's aspirations. Is that a bit cheesy in itself? Perhaps, but I think it encapsulates what I feel this series in particular excels in the best. Being a goalpost for a genre that would only blossom as much as any of its viewers eventually would, while also continuing to be a cornerstone for both the West's exposure to it, and how much it inspired girls like myself to seek out who they truly are, no matter what it may be, and to never give up in the face of adversity. But, of course, I'm not the only person that's really had a personal effect happen with Sailor Moon. So, to give their personal feelings and thoughts on how Sailor Moon affected their own personal journey, I'm going to pass the floor over to a good friend of mine, Jazzy Oliver, to give their personal feelings on how Sailor Moon affected them. Take it away, Jazzy.
Hey everyone, this is Jazzy Oliver, voice actress and known procrastinator, as Chloe will no doubt tell you. I was supposed to have this out some time ago, but shit went down. I live in Texas. What are you gonna do? I was first exposed to Sailor Moon at around, I want to say, late high school, early college. It was a few years back. It wasn't that long ago, honestly, especially considering I'm 25 now. I was introduced to it thanks to the Viz dub of the first series. I didn't watch the old dub. The only context I have of that is clips I've seen of YouTube, and I may need to watch it one day because from what I've seen, it's hilarious.
Stop right there, Sailor Meatball.
Unintentionally so, but still hilarious. I watched all of the first season of the original Sailor Moon through the Viz dub, and I got partway through Sailor Moon R, but I really couldn't get into it as I felt the relationship drama between Mamoru and Usagi was annoying. So I had read the manga, and through the manga I ended up watching Sailor Moon Crystal. In fact, I was able to watch the third season of Crystal as it was coming out dubbed, and I own all the Blu-rays for Crystal, and I have watched through it multiple times as well as read the manga. And I personally really enjoy both. I understand Crystal is a bit divisive among the fan base, but I just found it moved smoother and the characterization was just overall better. You could argue it's rushed, and I totally get that, but at least it has pacing, and it's not just dicking around until the plot decides to happen, which was honestly the biggest problem I had with the original, aside from the god-awful relationship between Usagi and Mamoru. But regardless of how I feel about each iteration of Sailor Moon, which I prefer over the other, I do have respect for it because it came to me at a time where I really needed it. Like, around late high school and early college, I was coming to the understanding that I was transgender. And I think Sailor Moon helped me embrace that, oddly enough. Again, mostly the manga and Crystal, because while the original anime certainly had LGBT characters, it wasn't exactly the most well-treated bunch of characters. But it kind of showed me this idea of femininity as power, and I loved that sort of thing. And not only did it help shape my gender identity, but oddly my attraction as well, because Sailor Uranus was the first time I realized I really liked androgynous chicks, so that was kind of interesting. That was very interesting to see. So I'd say Sailor Moon, regardless of my opinions of the original anime compared to the manga and Crystal, I have a lot of respect for it, for what it is, the impact it has, and what it's done for me.
thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this first episode of In Transition. I know it took a little bit for me to get this video out, mainly because of a lot of things happening that was outside of my personal control, but I'm finally getting into the groove of how to get into this, and I promise the second episode of this will be coming out, if not by the end of the month, then sometime by the beginning of April. And you will be and if that does end up happening, you'll be getting 2 episodes in April instead of this month. Over here on the side, you'll be seeing a few additional videos that may include the original primer video, and also a playlist for any episodes that you may have missed up until this point. If this is your first jumping on point with my videos as well as In Transition, please hit the like button and the subscribe button in order to subscribe for more content, like this and other additional content as well. Your support means a lot to me, and I appreciate everything. Thank you all for the time, and catch you next time.